He held the skull in his hands and admired the glory of God. The hands of the priest felt the sharp cheeks and the occipital bone of Dawson's atom. Chardin found in it the distinct mark of primitive, emerging humanity. That bone face twisted in the striving eyes of the ape dared to gaze upward to that infinite unity, a gyre Chardin believed all life traversed. He set the skull down as Darwin's portrait glowered. Eoanthropus dawsoni, I take it, Chardin said. That's right. Note the occipital bone, roughly 2/3 the size of a human's, and note too the jaw, quite archaic, Woodward said, taking the skull into his own hands. All but 2 of its teeth were strange to find in a man's mouth, particularly the canines, whose sharpness stuck with Chardin. You said you found this where? Chardin asked Dawson. The older man had a proud look on his face. Piltdown. Someone working a gravel pit there found these pieces and shared them with me, Dawson said. Dr. Woodward and I have investigated the site together several times, finding more pieces, though only the skull was found in situ. What about those canines, Dr. Woodward? Chardin asked. Let's see. Look at it this way. What part of man as we know him evolved first? Woodward said. Meaning, when did pre-man become man? Chardin asked. Precisely, Woodward said. I have heard it said the brain was the first to evolve, since that is what makes man man. I am of the same opinion. You see, this jaw did not evolve so quickly as the brain. As a result, it retains several primitive characteristics. The canines, as you point out, are among those. Not even Homo neanderthalensis has canines like that, Chardin said. Nor Homo heidelbergensis. In some way, Dawsoni represents another strain of humanity at its very beginning stages. Heidelbergensis and neanderthalensis do not, despite retaining several primitive features, Dawson said. Indeed, the teeth were primitive, and Chardin did not doubt the possibility that the evolution of the brain preceded that of the jaw, since, after all the cosmos was building up to that natural precipice beyond which nothing else rises. Dawsoni was a rough-hewn stepping stone to man in his last form, prepared for whatever awaits him in that realm Chardin could only hear whispers of, feel the breath of, tremble in anticipation. Quite right, Woodward said, returning the specimen to its container. The three stood in silence as Chardin formulated his response. He wanted to go to Piltdown and take part in all this, but something felt off. Perhaps it was the glances between Dawson and Woodward that belied otherwise gentlemanly exteriors. He found Darwin's eyes and wondered what story he would tell. Of man's origins, there were innumerable stories. Each, in its time, enraptured the minds of those who would listen to the storytellers. A story like that had power to define an epoch, an entire civilization, as the story of Adam had. Man was formed by God from the dirt until that ceased to make sense. It was inexplicable that the frame the very nature of man rested in could gather dust and render it more than unreadable, simply unintelligible. And all the world fell silent, listening for a new answer. Who would fill the space, weave the fabric to bind all mankind? Let's go to the site, Chardin said. He would have to see the site first before coming to any answer. They found a date that worked best, and within the month, Chardin, Dawson, and Woodward found themselves at Piltdown. The place looked just as it had in the announcement's original publication, a small patch of rolling dirt occasionally dressed up in bush or tree, all beside a series of villages unchanged since the first arrival of the Anglo-Saxons as quarry workers pulled from out beneath the foundation the very secrets of man. Chardin wondered, perhaps, if they were buried to be forgotten. Almost as if they were walking hand in hand, Dawson and Woodward returned to where the skull was said to have been found, a shallow pit whose origin was the strata as reported. Both smiled. Dawson more reserved, Woodward less so, his mustache curling into his dimples. Some fruit of knowledge was drawn from that hole. The stuffy smell of loose soil and gravel reminded Chardin of a garden. In the refuse piles, I figure we can find more about that particular life. The original finder, after all, thought he had found a fossilized coconut, Dawson said. So we are bound to find other things overlooked. Are you ready? Woodward asked. Chardin replied by preparing his tools, and with a nod, they got to work. The refuse piles dissolved as they worked away. Every spadeful was a manuscript elaborating through the ages on the nature of man. There were the shards of time cast aside in the pursuit of bone, the living flesh, the animated material most like that whence it all was ultimately derived. And the loads were tossed into the air, exposed to creation's destiny as it fell back to earth. It was the soil that birthed the man who put it best. What a piece of work is a man. Chardin could see the skull in his hands, the unification of that play, as each line slithered between the gaps in the bones. And there were the slit eyes gazing amber back at Chardin. It had to be England, the cradle of empire to rival Rome. It pained the Frenchman to admit it, but here was Earth's most glorious race, reared by the ghosts of the first men to finish their project. It was information knit into the very cosmos, rendered audible by scientific instruments. and soon the whole world would wake up and shout in one voice a new story of man and God and Christ and cosmos. And there was the tooth as predicted by Woodward. It bore all the traits as described by Woodward and then some. Chardin held it between his fingers, and as his thumb rolled over the grooves, he lost his smile. "You found something?" Woodward shouted from a nearby pile. "Something," Chardin said. Dawson still had that smile. He raised his eyebrows as Chardin tried to read them. They could not be serious, could they? Woodward came over and exclaimed. "Unbelievable," Woodward said. His hands cupped to receive the tooth. Chardin did not break eye contact with Dawson. "What story indeed will you weave?" Chardin handed the tooth over and Woodward almost came to tears. "It's all right. Man had his origin here in Sussex," Woodward said. "Quiet. This is the greatest discovery of the century," Dawson said, finally approaching. He still had a shovel in his hand. "Quite convenient," Chardin said, weighing his choices. Dawson had in his eyes an invitation, Chardin deciphered. Chardin frowned. "What shall we say about Dawsoni?" Dawson asked. "That he has the teeth of a chimp?" Chardin said. "Precisely," Woodward said.